Bobby Lopez was raised by his lesbian mother and her partner, and he embraced the homosexual lifestyle. But in his late 20s, he unexpectedly fell in love with a woman. His story and his thoughts on the current debate about redefining marriage next. Hello and welcome to Significant Insights. I'm Jerry Rose. Today, we're bringing you a very interesting conversation between Greg Bogdan and Dr. Robert Oscar Lopez. He's an assistant professor in the English department at California State University, Northridge. Now, a novel could be written about his personal story. His parents were divorced when he was very young, and he was raised by his mother and her lesbian partner. As a young adult, surrounded by his mother's friends, Robert identified with the homosexual community and entered the gay lifestyle. However, then in his late 20s, much to his surprise, he fell in love with a woman who is now his wife. He advocates for children these days and does a lot of writing and speaking about issues around marriage and the gay community. But we start the program today with his childhood.
In a lot of ways, I was very happy during my childhood and my adolescence. I mean, I definitely struggled with not having a male role model, but that wasn't such a critical problem for me until I got older. When I was young, that was the world that I knew. That was what I was familiar with, and there were two different sort of female figures that gave me a great deal of love, and I'm very appreciative for that. And I did learn a lot from my mother and her partner in terms of staying together, overcoming, prejudice or hostility or obstacles.
Right.
And I'm faithful to my wife now the way that my mother was faithful to her partner. So there was a lot of good that came from it. I think there were some downsides to it that are important to take into account, the biggest of which is that my father existed and I knew of him and I had contact with him intermittently. And so there was a tension in my mind about why isn't he in the picture? What is my relationship to him? It's unclear, right? And the other thing is just that I didn't really have a male example to follow. I had, two very loving mother figures, but as I grew up and became a man and then started considering whether or not I wanted to pursue girls, I didn't have the confidence to meet girls. I didn't have the confidence to ask them out on dates, and so I just assumed that I was gay. And I kind of wanted to be gay when I was young. I really, really wanted to be gay because all the people that I admired and who were around me sort of were tied into this culture that I respected.
Right. Was your father involved in your life at all?
Yes, I saw him once in a while, every couple of months. So he lived not that far from where we lived, and I have a very good relationship with him now. I built up a relationship with him in my 20s.
Good. Did you have other male role models in your life at the time, or was it pretty much?
I had a brother, and my mother's partner had a son, but they were remote from me. First of all, both of them had good relationships with their fathers. My brother is some years older than me, and so he got along well with my father. They had a closer relationship. My brother had memories of my father being around, whereas I didn't. And so he couldn't replace my father.
Right.
And then there were other men that my mother brought into my life to kind of be a male role model, but they were transient. So I mean, they came in, they came out of my life. It wasn't. I didn't have a father figure that was there in the home that I really could turn to and trust and rely on.
Growing up, you developed girlish mannerisms, a lisp, and were kind of considered, I think in your own words, a bit of an outcast. Do you believe that others were seeing you as gay at that moment, and
Yes.
did that impact you?
Yeah, I thought I was gay too. I thought I was gay. In fact, if anything, I kind of cultivated it, because I was aware from a very early age that there was this world of the homosexual world, that my mother was part of it, and I wanted to be part of it too. And then it was a kind of, it fed off of each other. The more that kids made fun of me and alienated me and marginalized me because I was effeminate, the more I took that on as my identity. And so I ended up really considering myself gay. I tried really hard to be gay, to be honest with you, but it just turned out that I ended up falling in love with a woman, and so it just didn't work out. Yeah.
As a teenager going through high school and so forth, were you attracted, would you say, to boys or girls or both, or what would you?
I found both really attractive, but I found it really scary to try to talk to girls. I found
Because
it
of
really,
not having a role model to
yeah,
look?
I just didn't have a role model. I didn't know how men were supposed to relate to women, and it just seemed like I had to overcome so many hurdles to get a girl to talk to me because I was effeminate, because I was awkward,
Right.
etc. Whereas from a very early age, I realized that there were places in the city where I could go, where I could meet older men who would treat me very well, who would act like a father figure to me, and who all they wanted was sex in exchange for all that. And so it's a sad, I don't want it to sound really sad because I've overcome all of that, but that's the reality of what it was, is that, you know, as a teenager, girls were inaccessible to me, even though I did find them attractive, whereas men, it was very easy to meet men. I started that very early on, and I was rewarded for being with men, and that was the way that I was able to replace a missing father figure with a father figure who just wanted me to give them sexual favors in exchange for those kind of fatherly favors. It turned out that in my late 20s, you know, there was a girl that was in my graduate program, and I invited her over for dinner, and we drank a little bit too much wine. It was French wine. And one thing led to another, and then all of a sudden I realized, okay, there's a side of myself that I have been fighting that is there, that really wants to be with a woman, and I'm now in love with somebody, so I have to be true to this. I can't just have my cake and eat it too. So I had to phase out the side of myself that was tied to kind of fast, easy homosexual relationships, and that's how it ended up for me. I did end up having a religious conversion, but I don't want to emphasize that too much, because I think that I never went out of my way to try to turn away from the gay lifestyle, if that makes sense. I think I would have continued on it if I had not met the woman who became my wife. It was almost by chance that happened.
Do you think that had you not grown up in a home with lesbians raising you, that you would have ended up gay?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. This gets into the really difficult nature versus nurture question about whether people are born gay or they're not. I think after everything that I saw, I've been in the gay community for 40 years, Greg, because I was from the age of 2, and I'm still out as bisexual. I'm still involved in the gay community. I still write about gay things. So I'm still very much tied into it. After 40 years in the gay community, I just don't think that people are born gay. And yeah, that's a whole other debate that we can't settle here. But I think that if you are put in an environment where the profile of gay life is very prominent, and it's promoted to you, and there are no checks and balances, there's nothing restraining you, there's no inhibitions placed on you, I think it's very easy to fall into gay behavior and then to say that that is your identity. And a lot of people that I've seen, they go back and they reinvent their childhood in their memory, and they say, I knew I was gay from the time I was 5 or 6 or 7, when really it seems to me, having known them when they were 5 and 6 and 7, that it wasn't that clear when they were 5 or 6 or 7, that they developed that behavior over time, and then to make sense of it to themselves, they said, well, this is who I am. It was not my choice, it was some force outside of myself that gave me this inclination, and so that's who I am. Whereas I really believe that homosexuality is something that you do, it's not something that you are.
Wow, that's a provocative statement. Homosexuality is something you do, not something you are. But it comes from someone who has comprehensive experience with a lesbian mother and who initially embraced the gay lifestyle himself. When we return, we're going to talk about Bobby Lopez's perspective on same-sex marriage. We'll be right back.
Whenever they talk about the consensus from the American Pediatric Association, the American Psychological Association, throw it out. It's not worth the paper it's written on, because none of the research was done under valid circumstances.
Welcome back. You know, several states have legalized same-sex marriage, but a lot of people fail to realize that far more states, 30 in fact, have some version of a law on the books defining marriage as between one man and one woman. In part one of our program, Bobby Lopez talked about being raised by his mother and her lesbian partner, and concluded with his belief that he never would have entered the homosexual lifestyle had he not been raised that way. Well, today, Bobby is an advocate for children, and he travels, writes, and speaks for those who are too young to speak for themselves. Greg Bogdan now continues the discussion.
In our society, it's kind of been assumed that the ideal home is a mother and a father, and you know, with children. Growing up different than that, looking back at it now, do you see that there was a significant lack because of not having that male role model in your life?
I think that there are, it's tough to answer that question. I would say that we have to look at that question through two different lenses. One is sort of the romantic lens, where we romanticize the 1950s nuclear family, and I think some people hold up the father-mother standard because they just sort of want things to look like a Dick and Jane storybook, and I don't subscribe to that thinking. You know, I realize that there are so many different people who don't live that reality, but there's a different lens to look through, and that is the lens of human rights, which is that over the history of humanity, we've seen what happens when we don't respect a child's bond to its father and its mother. Your father and your mother are your heritage, they're your roots. Besides giving you examples to follow, and besides sort of educating you informally in the home about what men are like and what women are like, they also give you your name, and they give you your place in the world, and that assumes a great deal of importance, especially as you get older and you have kids of your own. So because of that, I think absolutely it's a human right that a child should have a mother and a father. It's not for romantic or religious reasons that I say that. I think it's just a human right. The United Nations respected that right in several different declarations of the right of the child. UNICEF sort of confirmed its commitment to the UN declarations of the rights of the child last year, and there are other international bodies that respect the fact that bad things happen when you uncouple a child from its mother and father. And so I think the baseline should be that as a society, we're committed to giving a child a father and a mother unless there is some other unavoidable circumstance.
Such as death.
Such as death or divorce. So those are the two big ones where we don't want to downgrade a same-sex couple that's raising a child because one of the parents died or somebody got divorced. But the idea of contriving a situation, of setting out on a relationship with the intent of putting a kid in a home that doesn't have a father in it or doesn't have a mother in it when that wasn't necessary, that I think is a violation of human rights.
Civil unions, obviously, you say you support.
I support civil unions, yes.
Where do you see the difference? Because for many viewers, they may be looking at this and go, well, geez, if you agree with civil unions, what's the difference in marriage? Because
here's the problem. In the United States, we had the debate completely backward from what happened in France. Okay, let me give you I spent a lot of time in France. I've been working a lot with French partners. In France, gestational surrogacy is illegal. Gay adoption is illegal, and insemination for lesbian couples is illegal. So they have protected all of that. They're having the debate now about gay marriage because they see the opening of gay marriage as the gateway to these other things that they have already decided are not good for children for a whole host of reasons. In the United States, what have we done? Like in the state of California, all of those other things are legal, but then we want to have a huge debate about marriage. It's like, trying to shut the barn door after the cow's gone out.
Right.
So ultimately, my attitude about the whole thing is triage. We're already hemorrhaging, and we have to try to figure out what's the best way that we can minimize the damage and make sure that as many children as possible do not lose a mom or a dad. I think civil unions are a good way to sort of give legal protection to gay couples because they do have a strong argument about hospital visitation rights or about, certain financial benefits if when one leaves the inheritance to the other. I think that they deserve those legal protections. If we create that space and we allow LGBTs to really develop and hone civil unions to meet the cultural specificities of their relationships, but we leave marriage as this placeholder so that the government in all these different states can continue to work on safeguards to make sure that as many children as possible are not deprived of a mom or dad. I think it's just the safest way forward because what's the problem is we haven't had a full debate about same-sex parenting. And that's the problem. That's the sort of the piece of the puzzle that's missing. And until we have that debate, I think we want to hold off on completely eradicating the role of motherhood and fatherhood in marriage, because that would aggravate a problem that's already a crisis in the U.S.
Are both sides open to that debate?
Well, no. I think the problem, I mean, one of the articles that I wrote for American Thinker was I think that there are 4 levels that I can show you and I can demonstrate have completely failed. In the academy, for 20 years, there was research done into same-sex parenting, but we know now from having looked at the reaction that researchers got when they came up with unfavorable data, we know that all of those researchers were aware that they faced certain reprisal if they came up with any data that was unfavorable to a same-sex parenting agenda. And that's worsened because many universities have hate speech codes. So if you're a researcher attached to a university, we're in the strange world where if you come up with data that says that same-sex couples don't give children everything that straight couples do, you're guilty of hate speech. So that's not...
So you can't even provide that research at that point.
We don't have any data. All of it has to be thrown out. Whenever they talk about the consensus from the American Pediatric Association, the American Psychological Association, throw it out. It's not worth the paper it's written on, because none of the research was done under valid circumstances. The press is now staffed by people who came through universities when this sort of political correctness was already in place. And the press has completely suppressed anyone who is from the other side. They're terrified of getting hate mail from the Human Rights Campaign, or of being boycotted by GLAAD, or by the Southern Poverty Law Center suing them, all of those things. So what the networks have done, the TV, the newspapers, the magazines, everybody, is they have just completely blacked out any opposing side. Doug Mainwaring and I, for instance, wrote a very rational, secular, critique of same-sex parenting to explain why we can't rush into giving the imprimatur to same-sex parenting yet. We sent that out to 20 different publications, all of which had been running back-to-back news articles about same-sex parenting, and not one of them would pick it up. I'm talking Salon, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today. None of them would pick it up. Okay? Then we have the two-party political system, which now, the press is completely in the tank. The academy is in the tank, and so now we're seeing the pressure on essentially the Republican Party to just jump on board with the Democratic Party. And so this is the truce that they're going to have. The two parties are basically going to meet halfway on gay parenting and just throw aside the issue of whether this is good for children or not. And that's failed. The two-party system has failed to really foster a reasonable debate. Part of this is the fault of the Republicans, because I think they got tied to too many people who were really making their argument out of genuine animus toward the gay community. But part of it is also the Democrats, because they have just not done due diligence to actually vet the platform that has been presented to them by the LGBT advocacy community. They take every single demand from Argus, or from the Human Rights Campaign, or from the Southern Poverty Law Center, or Equality California, these LGBT advocacy groups. Whenever they give their demands to the Democrats just basically rubber stamp it. They never tell them you've gone too far. They never tell them, go back and workshop this. So the two parties are a disaster on this issue. And then finally you get to the courts. What can the courts do? They're dependent on laws that are passed by legislatures that are elected through the two-party political system. Their expert witnesses are going to come from the academy and are all going to be terrified of saying anything under oath that is going to result in them, going back to their universities and getting fired. We can't have a debate.
We'll have more in our discussion with Robert Oscar Lopez right after this.
Same-sex marriage is basically saying, as a system, we turn our eyes away from the bond between a child and its biological father and mother, and that bond is going to be replaced by money.
Welcome back. Dr. Robert Oscar Lopez is really swimming against the political current by writing truthfully about his experiences in the gay community and being raised by a lesbian couple. You can read his work on thepublicdiscourse.com and americanthinker.com. Once again, here's Greg Bogdan and Dr. Lopez with some concluding remarks.
What are some of the other reasons you're against same-sex marriage?
Well, I think that we just, other than the main issue, which is we just haven't had a full debate, and so we don't have a reliable sense of what the impacts are going to be. I think that if we look at the history of American families, the biggest thing that happened in American history, which really scarred our family histories, was slavery. And the essence of slavery was people buying and selling human beings. I think a lot of people, when they think about slavery, they think of whips and chains and being forced to labor in the fields, and those were all awful things. But the worst part of slavery was the treatment of human beings as property, and the treatment of children as property, and the idea that, you know, after Thomas Jefferson banned the importation of slaves in 1807, for the last 60 years of slavery, the institution was perpetuated by forcing people to procreate and then taking their children away. And so I think we cannot take lightly the idea of creating a system like same-sex marriage, where we're saying, we're kind of acknowledging legally that people can get children without being able to conceive them, right? Now, it's different if you're an infertile couple that's heterosexual, that's a medical condition, right? Same-sex marriage is basically saying, as a system, we turn our eyes away from the bond between a child and its biological father and mother, and that bond is going to be replaced by money. And unfortunately, we have too much history behind us to look lightly on that. We have to really spend a lot of time understanding that and taking it very, very seriously.